Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating architectural and spiritual mystery that's hiding right in plain sight. We're looking at the ancient story of Jericho, specifically a tiny detail from the book of Joshua chapter 6. Now, it's a story we mostly all know, right? The great walls come tumbling down. But there's this one detail tucked in there that's just, well, it's way too intentional to ignore. According to the source text, one single house, built directly into those falling walls, somehow survived. I mean, how is that structurally possible? Let's get right into it.
How does a house built into a wall survive when the entire wall falls down? For this, I want you to step back from just being a casual reader of ancient history and really put your hard hats on. Think like an engineer for a second, because we're confronting a literal impossibility here. If a foundation crumbles, everything attached to it goes down with it, right? It's just basic physics. And yet, the narrative presents this massive structural anomaly that absolutely demands an explanation.
And the source text is actually incredibly specific about this. Joshua 2:15 states explicitly, "Her house was on the wall, and she dwelt on the wall." Okay, this isn't poetic language. The text isn't using some metaphor to just say she lived near the edge of town. No, it's making a literal, structural claim about the exact location of Rahab's house. It was physically a part of the city's fortification system.
Okay, let's dive right into Section 1, the engineering impossibility. To really grasp the magnitude of this anomaly, we kind of have to understand the physical layout of these ancient Canaanite cities. Let's just say they weren't exactly building to modern OSHA standards. Homes weren't just built near the wall, they were often integrated directly into the wall structure itself, built right on or against the outer fortification system. That means these homes literally relied on the wall just to stand up. Some of them, like Rahab's, even had windows that opened straight to the outside of the city. So her house was structurally tied to the very wall that was about to collapse.
Which brings us to the physics of the wall itself. If a massive stone and mud brick wall collapses, whether that's due to gravity, severe vibration, or some massive seismic force, basic physics dictates what happens next. Houses embedded in that wall, they're essentially hollow cavities. They are structural weak points. If the wall fails, these weak points should logically be the very first things to collapse, or at least get dragged down with everything else. Yet, the source text presents the exact opposite scenario. Everything else fell, but this one single house remained.
So, Section 2, analyzing the collapse.
If we treat this like a real forensic structural investigation, we have to ask ourselves, well, what kind of collapse could possibly allow for this? Let's systematically evaluate the models here. First up, a natural or uniform collapse. If the wall just gives way over time, the weak points fail first. So that definitely doesn't explain Rahab's house surviving. Okay, second, an earthquake. Earthquakes cause completely randomized damage. But a random quake doesn't explain the precise timing right after the Israelites shout, and it certainly doesn't explain the selective preservation of one specific, covenant-identified section. So that really just leaves us with a third model presented by the text, a directed collapse.
The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that the collapse was not a uniform physical failure, it was selective. The source text strongly implies that the wall actually fell beneath itself, creating these ramps of debris that allowed the Israelites to charge straight up into the city, an inward and downward collapse. And miraculously, right in the middle of this total structural failure, one very specific section of the wall did not collapse at all.
All right, Section 3, the scarlet cord marker. Now this is the real turning point of our investigation. When we shift our focus away from the bricks and the mortar, we see that Rahab was explicitly told to hang a scarlet cord from her window. Now why is this detail so vital? Because it means her house was visibly marked. The text heavily emphasizes that this identification happened before the destruction ever began. Think about that. The walls are still standing, the city is perfectly intact, but this specific structure is already being singled out.
This completely changes how we have to view her survival. We're not looking at incidental survival versus some random stroke of luck here. Because the structure was distinctly marked beforehand, the text presents her survival not as a lucky accident, but as a deliberate, calculated act of targeted preservation. You have a marked structure embedded in a collapsing wall surviving total destruction. That requires extreme precision.
Which brings us to Section 4, judgment and mercy.
Here's where the physical anomaly of the standing bricks bridges perfectly into the profound theological claims of the source material. You know, the typical view of the Jericho story is simply that God knocked the walls down in this massive show of force. But Rahab's house reveals something much, much deeper. According to the narrative, God didn't just destroy blindly. He discriminated. The claim is that he simultaneously collapsed what was under judgment and purposefully preserved what was under mercy. And the most staggering part? Both of these actions happened at the exact same moment.
And this isn't just an isolated incident in the source material either. This exact pattern of selective preservation is woven all throughout ancient biblical texts. Just think about the Passover, where houses marked with blood on the doorposts were spared, or the region of Goshen, which had light while the rest of Egypt suffered total darkness, or in Ezekiel chapter 9, where those with marked foreheads were spared. The consistent theological principle operating across all these texts is really clear. Judgment falls, sure, but it never falls blindly. It recognizes a mark of preservation.
Let's transition to Section 5, the deeper symbolism. So let's unpack the profound spiritual implications of this event. Because the scarlet cord isn't just a piece of red rope, it's actually viewed by scholars as one of the clearest foreshadows in the text. The scarlet color introduces blood imagery, directly pointing forward to the concept of Jesus Christ and redemption. It serves as a mark of salvation that identified the house before the judgment even arrived. Because let's be clear here, tying a piece of string to a window frame did not physically strengthen the mud bricks of Rahab's house. It spiritually identified it within the narrative.
Which brings us to this incredibly profound metaphor. She was in Jericho, but not of Jericho. Just think about the physical reality of that for a second. Rahab lived inside a condemned structural system. She was literally, physically built into the very fabric of a city that was destined to fall. Yet the text argues that because of the scarlet cord, she was spiritually separated from its destruction. It perfectly mirrors that concept found later in the book of John, chapter 17, of being in the world but not of the world.
And how exactly did she get to that point? Well, the text outlines a very specific sequence of a faith that acts before evidence. Step 1, she hung the cord before any destruction started. Step 2, she proactively gathered her family safely inside the house. Step 3, she acted entirely on an unfulfilled promise. She didn't wait to see the walls shake before making her move. Actually, according to the narrative, her salvation began long before the wall ever fell, simply because she acted on the promise without needing to see the physical evidence first.
I want you to just imagine the dramatic visual on that day. Picture an entirely leveled city. Massive walls collapsed inward, dust and debris completely choking the air, total destruction everywhere you look. And yet, right there in the middle of the rubble, one single section of the wall is still standing tall. In the context of the story, Rahab's salvation was not some hidden, quiet event. It was publicly evident. It was visually testifying to absolutely everyone who saw it. So let's summarize the theological weight of this event as presented in the text, because we often miss this whole angle. First, it claims God knows exact locations, not just a general zip code, but a precise spot in a massive wall. Second, salvation here is presented as covenant-covered. It's never just random survival. And third, the narrative argues that faith aligns you with a completely different outcome than your environment. While the story says everyone else in Jericho trusted the massive walls around them and died with them, Rahab trusted God and survived the total collapse of her environment.
And finally, Section 6, preserved within the wall.
This brings us to perhaps the absolute most impactful takeaway from the source material regarding the true nature of what happened that day. Listen to this concept carefully. The text illustrates that God's power is not just in bringing things down, it is in holding things up in the middle of a collapse. I mean, that is a staggering realization about this narrative. The most striking detail of the Jericho story isn't the destruction. It's that Rahab wasn't evacuated beforehand. She wasn't magically transported out of the city to safety. The text claims she was preserved directly within the wall as it literally crumbled around her.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. What if true faith isn't about escaping a collapsing system, but being miraculously sustained right in the middle of it? It completely reframes how we look at the house that did not fall. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.